Now, much like Linus, I have been finding myself becoming more and more put off at the thought of reviewing all-in-one water cooling units. I mean, they all pretty much look like they're cut from the same mold, and usually you have a 120 or a 240 millimeter radiator, you throw in some ugly FEP tubing and a low profile and sometimes really cheap looking pump, and bam, you have an all-in-one water cooling unit that just blends into the crowd. I mean, what fun is that? So when I opened the box for LIQTECH, yeah, funny name, I know. The LIQTECH 240 from Enermax, and admittedly, I didn't even realize they made all-in-one water cooling units before. I was immediately shocked by what I found inside. EVGA's ACX 2.0 cooler with its 3-phase 6-slot motor, 11 swept fan blades, and double ball bearing design offers reduced power, noise, and thermals for the optimum gaming experience. Click the link in the description to learn more. Now, the moment I pulled the cooler from the packaging, it became apparent from the get-go that this unit was not like other units that I had previously reviewed. Other brands seem to really place an emphasis on lightweight properties by using plastics and thin-walled aluminum radiators coupled with very delicate fins that seem to smash them if you even so much as look at them the wrong way, but not this bad boy. The first thing I noticed was the cooling fins are extremely heavy-duty. In fact, I was intrigued by how thick these cooling fins were that I felt compelled to run my fingers across them over and over again, as you can see, just to see how durable they are. And you know what? They didn't bend. Now, when I first showed pics of this thing on Instagram with the caption of heavy duty, some folks, can't even talk now, some folks expressed how unhappy they were with the cheap and delicate feel of other all-in-one coolers that you find on the market. And I have to say that I agree. In fact, sometimes all-in-one cooling units are shipped with pre-bent fins, removing all of the fun that you have bending them yourself. But not this guy. I mean, look at that. Now, if you want to bend these fins, you better bring some heavy-duty machinery, and my time maybe recommend a hammer. Now, you might be thinking,
Jay, why are you spending so much time talking about the fins?
Well, the matter of the fact is, the fins are typically the most fragile part of any of the all-in-one cooling units, and they're a part that people are always terrified of smashing, and rightfully so. You know, you move it around trying to get it into your case and finagle it in there, and you try and install it, and next thing you know, it can lead to some smashed fins, and that's not really attractive at all. So when I realized that Enermax went out of their way to create a unit that would offer protection and high quality fins, I felt that it was actually worth mentioning. Now, some of you may already know that many of the all-in-one coolers that are currently on the market are simply Asetek rebrands. And that's why so many of them look just the same. They're Asetek rebrands. But that's not the case here. In fact, Enermax has actually designed this bad boy completely in-house, all the way down to the pump design. Speaking of pumps, believe it or not, the pump creates heat, and anything that also creates heat must be cooled. Now, oftentimes the coolant passing through the pump not only cools the parts that it's touching, you know, the CPU in the case of all-in-one coolers, or maybe the GPU in the case of custom cooling loops, but the coolant is also picking up heat from the pump itself. Now, Enermax actually realizes this, and much like people do on their Lang DDC pumps with their custom loops, they've actually opted to pre-install a heatsink on the top of this pump as well. Now, this makes me very happy to see, because that means that there is less heat being dumped into the coolant itself, meaning for much cooler CPU temperatures for prolonged use. Now, lastly, there is a blue LED at the pump, adding a little bit of bling, but unfortunately, it is not an RGB LED. I'm not sure what companies have against RGBs, but I digress. Now, something else that's nice to see is that this thing is made entirely of metal. Well, except for the tubing, of course, because that would make installation of this thing a complete and utter bitch. But the pump and the brackets and even the radiator have a very nice heavy-duty feel to them thanks to their all-metal design. Well, except for the tubing, like we already discussed. One touch that they added was this kind of a metal shroud that's placed on the radiator. Now, this not only offers a sweet aesthetic to it, but it also offers even more protection. I'm firmly convinced that I could strap this thing to my chest and use it as a bulletproof shield. I'm not kidding, guys. This thing is freaking rugged. Don't do that with other brands. Now the fans that come with this unit are also pretty interesting. In fact, the blades have a bit of a sweeping blade to them, or a little sweeping blade design that not only reduces the chopping sound created by flat bladed fans, but this also increases the static pressure without having to massively increase the RPMs. Now speaking of RPMs, these fans have a switch on the hub where you can actually set the max RPM of the fans. Now when I saw this, I was like, now they call it their adjustable peak speed, or APS for short, and allows the user to set the max RPMs from 1300, 2000, or 2500 RPM. That's freaking amazing. In fact, I'm not personally aware of any other fans on the market that offer this feature. And I'm not talking about those cheap inline slider switches like the Antec fans have, but this is managed right at the hub on an electronics level. So if you know of any other fans on the market that currently offer this, let me know and speak up in the comments. I'd kind of like to check them out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the swept blade design offers a high static pressure, which is arguably the most important spec when it comes to fans and radiators. And these fans are still pushing an impressive 1.7 millimeters of H2O at 1300 RPM, 4.7 at 2000, and a whopping 7.4 at 2500 RPM. Now, just to put that into perspective, the Corsair SP120 high performance fans, you know, their static optimized pressure fan, hence the SP, pushes only 3.1 at 2350 RPM. Now that's half as good as these Enermax fans. And don't even get me started on the Quiet Edition. It was actually quite laughable. All right, so I've babbled on long enough about how this thing looks and about the fans. Let's go ahead and dive into the performance. So go ahead and cue up that transition.
Transition.
Now to really push this thing, I decided to hook it up to my Intel 4790K, which is of course overclocked. Now I chose to use this CPU instead of the 5820K in my test bench due to its inherently hot nature of the 4770 and 4790K. Now it's not very hard to cool the big CPUs like the 5820 or the 5930 or even the 8-core 5960X due to their epoxy-based heat spreader. Now Enermax is advertising that their all-metal pump and ceramic bearing are to blame for the lack of noise. In fact, this thing was so quiet, I was almost convinced that the pump was not even running at all. I'm not even kidding, guys, because when I powered up the system, I touched the pump, I felt no vibration whatsoever, and I immediately reached to the back of the PSU and I flipped the oh shit switch, as I call it, to power off the system because I was sure that I was running this, or that the pump was not running, and I was scared that I was going to damage my CPU. Now it's freakishly quiet. Now because I still didn't fully trust this ultra silent pump, I mean, if you can't hear it, it's just not natural. Anyway, I did my first test at stock speeds and voltages, which for the 4790K is 4.4 gigs, turbo at 1.2 volts, and to my surprise, the CPU was idling in the upper 20s to low 30s. Most of the time it was sitting right at 30 degrees Celsius on the socket, and the same goes for the cores. Now when it comes to the load temperatures, the socket maxed out at about 52 degrees Celsius, with the core sitting in the mid 40s to low 50s. Now that's 50 degrees Celsius under TJ Max for the chip, which happens to be 105, before the CPU starts yelling for thermal throttling to keep itself from being cooked to death. So yeah, the pump is working. Now that I was convinced that this thing was actually running, even though my brain still had a hard time wrapping itself around this absolutely silent nature of this pump, I mean, again, it's just not natural, I decided it was time for more power. Little Tim Toolman reference there. Now I decided to take it slow, bumping up the speed only a couple hundred megahertz at a time. Now while I was also increasing the voltage, I went to 4.6 gigahertz at 1.33 volts and I ran AIDA64 suite for 30 minutes to allow all the temperatures to stabilize and equalize. And the results are absolutely outstanding. Temperatures for the cores never exceeded the low 80s, with the package temp sitting in the upper 80s. Now sure, it's warm, but remember, this is an all-in-one water cooling unit, and we are still well under the danger zone for this CPU, 105 degrees Celsius. Now this wouldn't be JayzTwoCents if I didn't take some risks. So I decided to push my CPU to 4.8 gigahertz, and I maxed out the voltage all the way up to 1.4 volts. Yeah, that's well above the recommended voltage for any all-in-one water cooling unit. Now the results are actually quite amazing. The core sat in the mid 80s, which is outstanding. However, the package did reach a temperature of 97 degrees Celsius, at which the PC started to thermal throttle slightly at 3%, according to Ada64. But the odd part is, according to CPU-Z, the CPU never actually changed speeds or voltage. Now, once I pulled back the voltage to 1.35 volts, which is the max I recommend for a 24/7 use, by the way, the results are nothing short of custom loop type performance. Now, temperatures normalized in the mid-70s, with a couple of cores reaching the low 80s when processing FPU stress tests. But if you look at the screenshot, you can see that even when in the middle of stress testing, the cores were actually sitting in the upper 60s to mid-70s, with the package sitting in the mid-80s the entire time. The last thing worth mentioning is that this was all achieved with the max RPM set to 2000 RPM. But the cool thing is that the RPMs can still adjust down by using the BIOS in my Z97 classified behind me. In fact, it's set to 2500 right now, but they're only running at 50% speed. And even that 1.4 volt test where I got up to 97 degrees Celsius, it still wasn't running max speed on the fans. So how do I feel about the Enermax LIQTECH 240? I think it's a freaking home run. I'm really happy that I decided to look at this because, especially at a time when the cooler market really is kind of stale and everybody's sort of copying each other, Enermax has clearly spent a good amount of time refining this unit and creating a cooler that they really should be proud of. Now, when it comes to the pros, there are plenty to list. I mean, the fan design is outstanding, the aesthetics of the radiator and the pump are unique, and hell, they're even attractive. Even the tubing looks good. I really do like the look of flat black rubber tubes. I'm surprised I've never put one in a custom loop myself. Now, the heatsink on the pump is clearly working because I was specifically making sure to touch it during my stress tests, and the top of the pump did seem to be drawing some heat out of the pump. Now, the installation is easy, the instructions are very detailed, and they're very easy to follow. Oh yeah, and it also cools the CPU too, which is kind of a good thing, usually. But of course, there is no such thing as a perfect product. And what I'm going to start with is the very same thing I have knocked other brands with in the past, which is the lack of RGB lighting. I mean, with so many color combinations available with hardware now, red, green, heck, even yellow in my case, the blue LED really does seem a bit off. Even if RGB isn't something they plan to do, I would recommend that they at least change the color to white, or even at the very least, an option to turn the light off altogether. Now, some may say this is due to the lack of intelligent software, something that is currently included with all of the models of the Corsair units, or all of the i models of Corsair units, I should say. But perhaps maybe a toggle switch to change between red, green, blue, and white built into the pump would be something worth considering, and would actually make this unit more attractive to themed builders. But seriously though, at least consider changing the LED to white, because then it would match so many more units. Now, the last con worth mentioning is that the RPM switch on the fans are inaccessible once the unit is mounted. To change the RPMs, you have to remove the fan, which can be a bit of a pain in the ass should you decide later that you want to reduce the RPMs or max RPMs that they will spin at. This really isn't a huge deal though, since really all you are doing is limiting the max RPM, and since they are PWM fans, you can still slow them down with your onboard CPU fan header like I'm doing behind me. In fact, it even includes a PWM fan splitter, so you can run them on your CPU header. But as far as cons go, that's really it. And even the only cons I could come up with are really nothing more than nitpicks. So there you have it, guys. Jay's 2 cents on the Enermax LIQTECH 240. I really think they should change the name. But if you're shopping for an all-in-one water cooling unit, you really should consider this thing for your own rigs. In fact, I'm putting this very unit inside my CES portable PC that I'm building. Yes, I will be doing a video on that in the future. It really is just plain badass. Now, if you want to know where you can buy the unit, or you just want to learn more about it, check out the links down in the description for more information. Now also, if you have any questions or you just want to chat, I love interacting with the fans of the channel, and talking tech with you guys is a whole lot of fun. So feel free to head on over to Twitter at JayzTwoCents or Facebook and hit me up. Now, as always, guys, thank you for watching. You guys make the channel a whole lot of fun to keep working on. And as always, I hope to see you guys in the next one. Take care.